Okay, for the next factoring, we're going to factor by grouping. And in the last video we did, I mentioned this, where you're going to have like a, we had 2x plus 7 in parentheses, so it'll look similar to that. So if you want to factor by grouping, then what that means is, so basically I have 4 terms here. I've got MP plus 3MQ plus NP plus 3NQ. So what I want to do is group those together. So usually you just split it down the middle, and you got this side and this side. Sometimes you might have to rearrange to make it work, but usually you can just split it down the middle. So I want to factor out my greatest common factor on this side. So I've got MP plus 3MQ, so they have an M in common. So I can factor out an M, and I'm left with, if I've got MP and I've factored out M, I'm left with a P. If I've got 3MQ and I've factored out an M, I've got 3Q left. Okay, then I want to factor out my greatest common factor on this group here. So NP plus 3NQ. They have an N in common. If I factor an N out of NP, I'm left with P. And if I factor N out of 3NQ, I'm left with 3Q. So the point of doing that is to see if this matches. So now I have P plus 3Q and P plus 3Q. Those are the same. So just like in the last video, I said you could factor that out. It's the same thing. You can, if it was MX plus NX, you'd factor out the X. So it's the same idea. I'm going to factor out P plus 3Q. And when I do that, I'm left with an M plus an N. And I'm done. And you can check these always. You can always check factoring. P times M is MP. There's my first term. Or PM, it doesn't matter, but we'll say MP. P times N is NP, where there's that one. 3Q times M is 3MQ, which is right there. And 3Q times N is 3NQ, which is there. So you can always check when you're factoring, make sure it works. We have 3N squared plus 6N plus 9M cubed plus 12M. Okay, so again, I'm going to group them, so I'm going to split it down the middle. Out of the first two, 3N squared plus 6N, I can factor out a 3N. And I'm left with, if I've taken a 3N out of 3N squared, I'm left with an N. And if I've taken a 3N out of 6N, I'm left with a 2. Okay, now out of the second two, I got 9M cubed plus 12M, so I can factor out a 3M. 9, I've factored out a 3, so I've got 3 left. M cubed, I've factored out an M, so I've got M squared left. 12, I've factored out a 3, I've got 4 left, and the M I've factored out, so that's it, we're done. And you can always check this step as well. You can say, okay, 3N times N is 3N squared, 3N times 2 is 6N, 3M times 3M squared is 9M cubed, and 3M times 4 is 12M. So you can always check, make sure you did that right. Now you'll notice that this does not match that, so this cannot be factored by grouping. So if you do this and they don't match, then you cannot factor it by grouping. So if it cannot be factored, it's called prime. It just cannot be factored, but that's okay. You can have them that can't be factored. For 22, we've got 8x squared plus 16xy minus 5x minus 10y. Okay, so again, I'm going to split it down the middle. So out of the first two, 8x squared and 16xy. 8 and 16, I have an 8 in common. X squared and x, I have an x in common, and then the y will stay. So if I've got 8x squared and I factor out 8x, I just have an x left, because 8x times x is 8x squared. If I have 16xy and I factored out 8x, I have a 2y left, because that's 8 times 2 is 16, x and y. Okay, now out of the second two. So you notice here this is x plus 2y. So if this is going to work, I have to have a plus in here, which means I'm probably going to need to factor out this negative. So instead of factoring out a positive 5, I'm going to factor out a negative 5, because then it's going to switch these signs. So I'm going to say -5, I've factored it out, so I've got a positive x left, because -5 times x is minus 5x. -10, I factored out a -5, so I've got a +2, and the y stays, because -5 times 2y is minus 10y. So if you had factored out positive 5s, these would both be negative, and then they wouldn't really match. So you want to factor out the negative to make them both x plus 2y, so that now that these match, I can factor it out just like before. So I have x plus 2y times, if I factor it out, I'm left with an 8x minus a 5. And again, you can check it, FOIL it, first, outer, inner, last. So x times 8x is 8x squared. X times minus 5 is minus 5x, which is here. 2y times 8x is 16xy, which is here. And 2y times minus 5 is minus 10y. Okay, for the last one like this with grouping, we have a cubed b squared cd plus a b c d, or c squared dx, minus a squared bxy minus cx squared y. Okay, so again, I'm going to split it down the middle and factor out the greatest common factor for each group. So I've got an a cubed and an a, so I can factor out the a. I've got a b squared and a b, so I can factor out the b. I've got a c and a c squared, so I can factor out a c. I got a d and a d, so I can factor out a d. And then I've got no x and an x, so I've got to leave it alone. So if I factor that out, I'm left with a cubed, I factor out 8, I've got a squared. B squared, I factored out 1b, so I've got 1b left. C, I factored out, D, I factored out, so I'm done with that term. Plus A, I factored out, B, I factored out, C squared, I factored out 1c, so I've got 1c left. D, I factored out, and then I've got the x left. And then over here, again, this is a plus, so both of these are minuses. So if it's going to work, I have to factor out the negative. So I'm going to have minus. I've got a squared, no a, so can't do anything. I've got b, no b, so that can't do anything. I've got x and x squared, so I can factor out an x. I've got y and y, so I can factor out a y. And then this one has a c, and the other one doesn't, so I can't do anything. So that leaves me with, I've factored out a negative, so it's going to be positive, and I've taken out the x and y, so I've just got a squared b. And again, for the second piece, I've factored out the negative, so I'm going to make it positive. I've taken out, you've got the c that's left, so I've got c. I've got x squared, I've taken out one of them, so I've got one left, and the y's been taken out, so I'm done. And then again, you can check that on that step, it will check out. So now the question is does this match this? And it does. It's a squared b plus cx. So I can factor that out. So I'm going to have a squared b plus cx times, I'm left with, when I factor it out of this first term here, I'm left with a, b, c, d. And when I factor it out of this piece here, I'm left with minus xy. And again, you can check all that. It will check out if you check it. So a squared times a is a cubed, b times b is b squared, and then cd. So there's the first term. Then for the middle term, for one of the middle terms, you got a squared b times negative xy, which is minus a squared bxy. Then you've got cx times a, b, c, d. So you've got a, b, c squared dx, which is here. And then cx times negative xy, which is negative x squared y. So always check these when you're finished. So now you'll be doing questions on factoring by grouping only, and then we'll get into factoring completely. You can do the grouping method or guess and check or whatever you want in the next video. So you'll answer your questions on grouping, and then the last video will pop up.